And now, the survival show which once survived being bitten by a mutant Zika mosquito. In this episode, we sit down with Justin Carroll of PrepperOpsec.com. We're going to deep dive on your physical security so you can keep yourself and family safe. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 179. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Justin, welcome back to In the Rabbit Hole.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you for having me back.
I know last time we spoke about backing up data and these sort of, securing those intangible ones and zeros. But today, this is going to be fun because we're actually going to discuss a physical security. And I guess to start off, where do you define and how does that work for you? Like, what is physical security in a nutshell?
Definitely a much more fun topic for me today. So physical security is basically restricting physical access to an object or objects to an authorized individual, typically a key holder. And that kind of ties back to the information security side. If you can control physical access to a computer, a server, a rack of hard drives, whatever the case may be, that's 90% of the battle of securing that data. So physical security, the way we'll talk about it in this context, is securing your home.
So I guess in a general sense, where do we start with that?
So we could start, man, this is such a big topic.
Yeah.
There's about 25 parts, and we could almost do an episode on every single one of them. But I like to think of that as starting basically with perimeters around my house. So if the bad guy is already standing on my door, if a burglar is actually standing on my door, I've already lost a significant portion of that battle. I don't want it to ever get to that stage. So ideally, I'm going to have good rapport with my neighbors. My neighbors are going to be kind of my outer perimeter, if you will. And even if you live in an apartment building, typically you can engender some sort of goodwill between your co-tenants, so they'll keep an eye on your stuff for you. But if you live in a neighborhood, what we think of as traditional homeowner, your neighbors are going to have an eye on who's there, who's not supposed to be there. Hey, the Smiths aren't moving this weekend, but that truck's at their house loading stuff up, that sort of thing. And hopefully, if you've kind of established some rapport with them, they're going to give you a call or knock on your door just to see what's going on. So that's where that kind of begins.
So now, to back up for just a second, when you're talking about your neighbors and building a rapport, are we talking about social engineering and any sort of crazy ninja skills? Or are we talking about being a normal human being, going over and saying hi to your neighbors and introducing yourself?
No. I'm not intentionally social engineering my neighbors. I'm just kind of being a typical neighbor. And most people, if you invite them over to the 4th of July party, if you have them over for dinner once in a while, if you're just friendly in the street even, typically that's about all it takes for them to kind of start looking out for you. If you want to talk about social engineering, you can create that kind of altruistic reciprocity, give them a small gift, they'll feel obligated to you, whatever, but that's definitely not my field of expertise. If you want a really, really quick read, really quick primer on that, there's a book called It's Not All About Me by Robin Dreeke. Probably knock that book out in an hour. And that book has taught me more about interacting with people than probably anything I've ever read. And building really rapid rapport. It's really just being a neighbor, being neighborly. I look out for my neighbors. They look out for me, that sort of thing.
I gotcha. So as far as other measures that we can put in place besides engaging our neighbors into our own safety, which is a wonderful topic and a wonderful point to make. And I know a lot of people may think that topic on its own is a very basic thing, but it's something that so many of us overlook and ignore doing because we're tired. We come home from work, and the last thing we want to do often is engage the random neighbor next door, unless that next door neighbor is terribly attractive or something else. Usually it's like, I don't want to talk to the neighbors. But yeah, but I mean, going beyond that, what other measures can we put in place around the outside of our house? What other things can we do to help keep ourselves safe there?
That also kind of ties into the old axiom: seclusion does not equal security.
That's a great point.
Once we start getting into the next ring of the perimeter, next ring of that defense in depth, as I kind of tend to think of it, I want deterrent measures there. So motion lights are a really, really good one, and there are some incredibly good motion lights on the market for not a lot of money. That's a huge, huge deterrent for nighttime type break-ins. It's going to make people aware that someone or something is in your yard, and light at night tends to draw attention. Also, things like, even if you don't have an alarm, it's probably not a bad idea to throw some alarm company signs out in your yard. Fences, I'm kind of mixed on fences. If you have the big wooden picket privacy fence, that's actually almost counterproductive, because once an individual is on the other side of that fence, he has a concealed avenue of approach up to your house, whereas typically he wouldn't. You want to minimize places a person could conceal themselves moving up to your door or other points of entry.
So are you recommending more of like not necessarily a wrought iron, but something more open like wrought iron where you can actually see?
Yeah, probably most of us don't want a chain link fence around our house, or maybe some of us want it but aren't willing to pay that social stigma penalty. But yeah, the fence around the White House, the wrought iron, 4 inches between, with these very narrow but very strong stakes, it creates a physical barrier that someone has to cross, but it still lets you see what's on the other side of it, and it still lets your neighbors on the other side see what's going on in your yard. So unfortunately, privacy is not the same as security in that instance.
That's a really interesting point. I think a lot of people would be uncomfortable with that from the standpoint of thinking that they're losing, or that would, in most cases, actually lose some privacy. But then again, I guess it's how many of us are actually running around naked in our backyards. I mean, I do, but I've got a really big backyard and it backs up to the woods. So, rock on. But I think for most people, they're like, oh my God, people might see me. And it's like, all right, well, what are you doing back there?
Right. And believe me, I'm just as interested in privacy as everyone else, probably more so. I wrote a book on it. But when it comes to that, if security is, and we all make certain compromises.
Yeah.
And we all have to look at our personal threat model. How realistic is it? A cat burglar is going to scale my fence, creep through the backyard, and let himself in.
Yeah.
But that's maybe one of those potential points of compromise that you need to think about before you have a very expensive privacy fence installed. It could be detrimental to your security.
See, that's interesting. And I mean, going back to that again, I mean, it's not something I just don't think I've ever thought of it that way, but it makes an excellent point. In a lot of ways, somebody can, as a concealed avenue of approach, they can come right up to that and they could peer through the boards and watch what you're doing without you still being able to see that they're there.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, that's like super creeper land, but yeah, I mean.
But it happens.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So moving past fences, where do we go from there? Like I guess closing in that ring, what's next on the list here?
From there, the skin of my house is going to be the next most important physical barrier. And like I said, I don't want someone feeling comfortable getting to that point. If I've done everything else right, hopefully no one actually makes it up to the front door or back door or side door and is trying to get in. But once they have, should they choose to, for whatever reason, obviously I want to have, my security game needs to be tight at that point, depending on who I think might be coming after me, if that makes sense. So your average burglar, probably going to kick in the door. And frequently these things happen in the middle of the day. Burglar comes up, knocks on the door, no one's home because everybody's at work. And not a great deal of lock picking or key bumping or pick guns or key impressioning or whatever goes on at this kind of level of the criminal spectrum. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, it does, but statistically, very, very small percentage. Typically, it's going to be a forced entry, a destructive methodology, like kicking in the door or finding your key that's been hidden outside, which is never something that you should do.
See, that's interesting because I know they make, and I guess you've said a lot of interesting things here, but to stop for just a second, the part about leaving the key outside, I know a lot of people that do that and they'll use things like the fake rocks or they'll hide it under a potted plant somewhere or something else. Is that actually though a bad, like you're saying that's actually a bad thing. Like you shouldn't be hiding keys outside like that.
So in one of my past military government experiences,
Uh-huh.
I had about 200 hours of training in covert entry under a gentleman who, in his former life, ran a locksmith shop, and he forbade his locksmiths from looking for a key because he said somewhere between 75 and 80% of the time they would go out, spend 10 minutes looking for a key, find one, and then the homeowner didn't want to pay because the locksmith, quote unquote, didn't do anything.
Oh.
Yeah, it's very, very common. And if you kind of objectively examine someone's front porch, there are really only so many places to hide that key. There's an infinite number of places. The problem is we have to hide it in a place that's both memorable. So, it's under the flower pot, it's under the big rock, it's under the mat,
Yeah.
and a place that's not super inconvenient to get to when you're in a suit or a dress or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you absolutely have to have a key someplace, leave it with a neighbor. One of your neighbors is an old retired guy that never leaves the house or something along those lines. I would leave it in the control of someone that I trust. I would not leave it hidden outside because we're not very creative when it comes to hiding keys.
That's a really interesting point, or at least we're a lot less creative than we think that we are, probably.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we've got the exterior of the house with the skin, and we've got keys. So I guess let's get into, and you brought up locksmith, and that kind of segues us into the locks themselves, and also I guess people kicking in doors, and we could probably spend some real time here talking about all that goes on with doors and forced entry. So let's start there. Pick your place. I guess, should we start talking about deadbolts, or do we talk about the physical door itself? Where do we go there?
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about both of those things really quickly. Though I'll throw in one other thing. I own probably 10 of those plug-in lamp timers that are programmable, and the ones I buy, they're made by GE. They're about $10 a piece.
Mm-hmm.
You can program 21 different on-off cycles, which means 3 times a day, 7 days a week. So I have a radio on one of those in my house that anytime someone's gone, this radio is playing, generating noise. So if you walk up to the door, it's, it seems like someone's in there watching TV or listening to the radio.
Mm.
And at night, if we're gone or out of town, there's a pseudo random cycle of when the lights in the bedroom come on and go off. And, maybe I'll have one program to come on randomly at an hour and 15 minutes after we go to bed for 5 minutes and turn right back off. That's a big piece of the pie. If someone's really taking a look at your pattern of life and they're not sure if you're home or not, that goes a long way. But
so here's a quick question, and I was thinking about this the other day because we do the same thing. We use hue lights, and we moved into this new house, and I've been going through the process of replacing all of our bulbs with hue lights and setting up all these different pretty scenes, but also doing it and setting up scenes and timers with security in mind. But I was like, I wonder how often is it really that someone is actually staking us out and watching for our patterns and seeing it? I mean, is this something really that your average or even slightly above average home thief is going to, an activity they're going to engage in?
Probably not. This would be the notable exception to me.
Okay.
If you go on vacation and leave Houston,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gone for 7 nights, and I drive through that neighborhood, everyone else drive through the neighborhood at 9:30. Everyone else's house has one light on upstairs, most of the lights on downstairs, and maybe a porch light on. But your house is completely dark. That might be an indicator to me. The other one might be if I come through there at 2:30 in the morning and all the lights are on and everybody else is completely dark. Maybe this house is about to go on the market and the lights are on because nothing's in there. Anything that looks significantly different than the baseline is going to make me more interested. Again, it depends on your threat model. If you're just trying to stop that common petty burglary, still I would kind of recommend that. I wouldn't want to be the dark house on the end of the street.
Right.
And how far is this going to go with a much more sophisticated adversary who's maybe is taking you out, who's not seeing a car come and go every day or that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
It's one more thing that makes your profile a little more resilient.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. It's one more layer of protection, one more thing that says, go rob somebody else, don't bother with me.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So doors, since you mentioned it, so if you're actually looking at security doors, most of your residential doors are laminated doors. They'll have a wood edge, so like a small strip of wood around the edge of the door. It'll be very, very light gauge metal on the outside. And the inside of that will typically, on an exterior door, be filled with very rigid polystyrene foam. And typically a kick-in attempt, I'm not going to put a high security lock on that door because as soon as, 5 or 6 kicks into it, you're probably going to start to delaminate that metal from the wood edge, and the door is actually going to fail probably before that lock does. If destructive entry is the methodology that you're primarily concerned with defending against. You can buy solid wooden doors or solid fiberglass doors, both of which are a significant upgrade. But there's also an attendant cost to that. Both are somewhat more costly. But I mean, that is the portal to your home. I would invest probably in some better doors. And then if you want to spend real money, there are multi-point locking high security doors that still look like an average residential door. If you're in a very crime-ridden neighborhood, that might be something to consider, or have a very high personal threat model. That might be something to think about. But for most of us, probably a solid wooden or solid fiberglass door. And probably, personally, I'm a little more fond of fiberglass where that's concerned.
How come?
I think it's a little stronger than the solid wood doors.
Okay.
There are also things like jam armor that you can put on your doors. That's a fairly laborious installation process. It's basically metal that encircles the entire jamb of the door. It's some reinforcement for the hinges and a reinforcing plate that goes over the lock block in that inexpensive exterior door. So where the locks are held, the knob and the deadbolt, there's typically a roughly 1 foot by 6 inch piece of MDF board in there rather than just that cheap foam.
Okay.
So you take the locks off, you slap this layer of steel on, a couple of screws to just hold the edges flush with the door, and then you throw your locks back on.
Oh, and, I think I know what you're talking about. It's like that, it's almost like a sleeve you put on, and then you put the over the door, and then you put the locks back on.
That's probably a better description, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually had a previous house I had a garage apartment, and somebody, a tenant kicked in there. Something stupid happened. Anyway, the door got kicked in. The thing was broken, and that's ended up how I repaired the door. Was using one of those things. Those are pretty cool. So,
yeah, and I think they do a pretty good job. Also on that, when you're putting your hinges in, don't just use those 1 1/4 inch wood screws that come in the box. I would go buy some 2 or 3 inch coarse threaded wood screws and make sure I'm hitting the stud and not just the jamb of that pre-hung door. Typically hinges are weight bearing, so sometimes those screws are a little longer. I would err on the side of quite a bit longer to make sure I'm firmly contacting the stud behind there. And the same thing with your strike plate that your deadbolt falls into when it's extended. That strike plate is typically only held in place by 1 1/4 inch wood screws, which they don't reach the stud. So really all that's holding your door shut is a small piece of steel tenuously connected to a piece of pine. There are, I'll make sure I get a link to you, but there are steel strike boxes that you can purchase that they basically have a steel box that surrounds the entire deadbolt. You have to typically mortise out a little bit of the wood to recess that back into the jamb sufficiently. And then there will be 3 inch wood screws that go through the back of that thing to make sure you're hitting the jack stud and the king stud, and then 2 more at the top and the bottom. And that's a much, much more robust solution, much harder to kick in because you're actually connected to the stud at that point.
So is that, and I guess we should back up for a second and address that, is that really the most common way that criminals are going to enter a home, is by kicking in the door?
Frequently. So the sound of glass breaking is very, very distinctive.
Oh, yeah.
incredibly distinctive. Everybody knows it immediately when they hear it. And people in a fairly tight-knit neighborhood are probably going to be prone to investigate that. Burglary may or may not be what immediately pops into their head, but they're probably going to have questions about that. Whereas putting your size 10.5 lockpicks on a door 3 times is just basically a dull thud 3 or 4 times, and then it's over, and it's indistinct. And typically, when anyone hears that, unless you live in a really crime-ridden neighborhood, the first thought through your head is probably not, "Hey, that sounds like someone kicking in a door." It's probably like, "Man, are the neighbors hanging pictures or what? What's going on over there?" So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very, very common methodology. And sadly, I didn't pull statistics before this, but yes, it's extremely common. And let me caveat this too with all these locks. You can spend as much as you want on locks. I will point you in the direction of some very expensive locks. But as far as keeping a petty criminal out, they're only going to keep out someone who is unwilling to break glass.
Yeah, I was listening to a conversation between 2 people a long time ago, and one of them was going on and on about it was like a $300 or $400 lock that he just installed, and he was like, try to pick this. And the other guy was like, I'm not going to pick that. I'm going to pick up a rock and throw it through your window that's right next to your $400 lock. And the other guy just looked so dejected. He was like, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, so one of my things with that is I'm very fond of high security locks, both from kind of a mechanical interest standpoint and the fact that I'm a security nerd, so it just pleases me. But what a high security lock gives me is, yes, you could break the glass on the door and reach around and unlock it and come in, but you're not going to get into my house without me knowing about it.
Yeah.
So you're not going to come in, do something, and then leave, lock the door back up without my knowledge. Again, probably not a realistic threat model for most people. But let's say you use double cylinder deadbolts, which require a key to lock from both the interior and the exterior. And I want to be very careful here and say that that does prevent a potential life safety hazard if your house catches on fire and you need a key to unlock your deadbolt from the inside. That could significantly delay your egress. So I want to be clear on the downsides to that. And some building codes forbid those. But let's say you do break a window and come in, you still can't unlock my doors from the inside. So you're going to be very limited what you're able to take out of my house.
Yeah, you're not likely to be crawling in and out of your average residential window with a 60-inch flat panel TV through the window.
Right. Yeah, my grand piano is safe, and my not that I have a grand piano, but yeah, you're limited in basically what you can safely fit out of that window without dropping it and destroying it, which defeats your purpose, or dropping it on yourself. So gun safes, things like that, I'm not super worried about you leaving my structure with.
Now, you brought up an interesting point. I know this was also in your notes here as far as doorknobs. And I know I have a personal aggravation with modern doorknobs that lock, but that when you grab a hold of them and turn them, they don't feel like they're locked, and they'll open for you. And as soon as the door shuts behind you, you've locked yourself out of wherever the hell you are, which makes me absolutely batty. But you also had something in here about doorknobs and locks. What was that?
I say don't use a locking knob set ever, ever, ever. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, it's like you said, very easy to lock yourself out. Well, there's 3 reasons for that. 2, they don't provide very much security at all. So I'm sure everyone's seen the credit card trick, like, oh, it's a doorknob, let me try my credit card.
Yeah.
That works because that's a spring-loaded latching mechanism, and because it's typically installed or adjusted incorrectly. So it's either been installed incorrectly from the get-go, or as the house is settled, it's come out of adjustment. So this is going to be hard to explain over verbal medium. The actual latch is curved on one side, the side that strikes the door when you close, or strikes the jamb when you close the door. It's curved to allow the jamb to push it back into the door, and then spring forces it into that strike plate when the door is closed. On the back of that latch, there's a very small piece that moves independently. And if you push that piece, it's called the dead latch. If you push that in all by itself, that should lock the rest of the latch from being able to retract into the door. Unfortunately, if a door is out of adjustment, that dead latch will fall into the strike plate as well, now making that latch live again, which means you can push your credit card in there, it pushes the latch out of the way, and you can open the door. Even if your door is not installed or adjusted incorrectly, there's typically a layer of weather stripping around the edge of the door, and you typically have enough play in that. If you pull on the door kind of hard, you can close it enough to get that dead latch to fall into the strike plate, again opening up that vulnerability. So only the scantest bit of security is actually provided from that. So the reason I don't recommend them all is they make you lazy. You know what? I'm just running up the street to the store. I don't really need to lock the deadbolt, so I can just lock the doorknob. If you just have a privacy or a passage knob that doesn't have a lock, it kind of forces you mentally into locking that deadbolt every single time.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's a random one for you. How do you feel about the new smart locks that are coming out?
I'm sure some of them are good. Not insignificant. I'd probably 80 to 120 hours of training on electronic lock defeat, and it is not confidence inspiring at all. I don't have one currently. I'm strictly mechanical until I find something that really withstands some testing. I'm not incredibly comfortable with those. And then once they get internet connected too, now you really have to worry about all of the supporting infrastructure being secure, which you've probably heard of Shodan, the website where you can go on and look at all the open webcams, many of which are in people's homes, and they're there because they're unsecured. In many cases, you can also look at people's smart homes, turn their lights on and off, turn their heat up or down, lock or unlock their doors. I don't recommend you do that.
Right.
But they've failed to adequately protect that account. And in this case, all they have failed to do is put a password on it at all, so it's completely open.
Yeah, I remember when we would do a long time ago when we may or may not have been goofing off war driving, and we would find people with the Cisco routers that had that always had the same default admin
Right.
and password, and we'd go in and screw with people's router settings because we were bored and we were jerks. But anyway, yeah, that's I could definitely see people doing that. People get these new gadgets and then don't bother to lock them down.
Yeah, and it's easy because from my smartphone I forgot to lock the doors. I can lock the doors, but I worry about the security of the protocols through which that information is being transmitted from my phone. I don't know if that's through a TLS connection or not, and really, unless I'm really technically literate, I don't know how to test that, and I don't know how secure that lock is against physical interventions either.
Yeah. Justin, let's take a quick break for this important message. Listener, do you get at least $3 a month worth of value out of ITRH? Well, you should see what we do for Armada members. Check it out today by visiting ITRH.net. That's the super secret ITRH Armada portal. Now, what do members get? Members get access to episodes a day early. And when you become a member, you'll receive an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat about survival with myself and other Armada members all day long. You'll get a free copy of the book, Owning Your Survival, so you can have a plan and do it right. Access to our famous ITRH Bob and emergency kits on-demand class. Make that perfect Bob. Learn what to obsess over, and more importantly, learn what not to obsess over. My insane ammo inventory spreadsheet. You'll finally have instant access to knowing exactly what you have whenever you want. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH, including one with a famous knife maker that was never aired. And that's just to name a few things. Remember to visit ITRH.net today to get more benefit and help the show stay safe and sound, which keeps you safe and sound. Now, back to Justin. So what about as far as grades of mechanical locks and actually understanding when someone is standing in the hardware store, be it Home Depot or whatever, and they're looking at all these different locks, what are they actually looking at? And I guess help us understand what we're looking for when we go looking for a good lock.
Okay, so typically what you're going to see in the big box store is your grade 3, and that's ANSI BHMA, the American National Hardware Standards Institute, and the Building Hardware Manufacturers Association. They have 3 grades of lock, 1 through 3, and those all have very, very different standards. And the actual standards, you have to pay for access to them. So I'm not going to go into the entirety of that here and get sued. But a few big things from that. So operational cycles is a big one. Your standard home deadbolt is rated for about 100,000 operational cycles. And that's a lot. That's probably fine. As compared to your grade 1 deadbolt, which is rated for 800,000 operational cycles. So that should be right away a big indicator just of kind of the quality of the hardware. They're also required to undergo, deadbolts are, a strike resistance. So basically your kick-in test. So a grade 1 deadbolt will have to withstand one blow of 60 foot-pounds. Grade 2 will have to withstand 2 blows at 90 foot-pounds and 2 blows at 60 foot-pounds. And your grade 1 deadbolt will have to withstand 2 blows at 120 foot-pounds, 2 blows at 90, and 2 blows at 60 foot-pounds without failure. So almost more orders of magnitude increase in the forced entry resistance on those, and much, much higher quality. The tighter the tolerances in that mechanical hardware, the much harder it is to defeat through lockpicking, bumping, that sort of thing.
So, and I guess to back up for a second, so the cycles you were referring to, 100,000 versus 800,000, are you actually talking about the number of times somebody turns a key in that?
Yeah,
way?
yeah.
Okay.
So key goes in the lock, turns, deadbolt extends, key comes out of the lock. Key goes in the lock, key turns, deadbolt is retracted back into the door. Is one operational cycle.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I assumed that's what you meant. I just wanted to make sure we were all, that
Oh,
both
yeah.
myself and the audience were clear on that one. And so for the foot-pounds, that, I guess, how can we put that in perspective as far as different orders of magnitude? Is it a difference of a 6-year-old kicking at the door versus a 300-pound gorilla of a man kicking at the door? What are we talking about there in foot-pounds?
So between a grade 3 and a grade 1 deadbolt, that's pretty much the analogy I draw. The 80-pound teenager versus the 250-pound, like, fairly experienced criminal. And this also relies on that deadbolt being installed correctly. Again, using things like, this is the deadbolt itself, not the strike plate,
Right.
That's been installed incorrectly. So you can't just throw that $100 deadbolt on your door and say, I'm good. You also have to look at that strike plate. Maybe you want to take a look at the door itself. Again, if it's that residential metal laminated door, the door is probably going to fail first.
That makes sense. Okay.
But I would say definitely buy the highest grade you can afford. Grade 2 and grade 1 locks are typically going to allow you to install 6 pins rather than 5. Although they usually come from the factory with 5. And you may have to ask your locksmith to install that 6th. But most of your grade 3 hardware only allows you to go up to 5 pins. That 6th one is the difference, an enormous difference.
Is it a difference for, because I know in lockpicking it's a difference, but is it a difference for key bumping?
So most bump keys are probably going to be cut for 5-pin hardware.
Okay.
Not that you can't get those for 6-pin hardware, but it is a longer key blank because it has to reach that 6th pin. So already you're excluding some of the bump keys out there. Additionally, it is a little more difficult because that's one more pin that has to be manipulated to that shear line at the same time in order for that cylinder to turn. So any surreptitious entry technique, that's going to create one more layer of difficulty.
Okay.
I get the highest grade you can afford. So your $15 deadbolt at the big box hardware store is almost invariably going to be grade 3. And to be quite honest, this is unfortunate, but you're probably going to have to go to a locksmith to get anything better than that. The one exception may be Quickset's. It's called Smart Key, which allows you to change the key without calling a locksmith. If you want to rekey your locks, you put the key in, turn it 15 degrees, put this little tool in, remove the key, put a new key in, and you're done.
Oh, that's interesting.
Those are frequently available in grade 1, which meets the forced entry standard. There's a lot of kind of buzz on the internet about how hard those are to pick. I haven't really found them to be all that difficult. And there's plenty of videos online of reputable people picking these locks with some amount of ease. So I wouldn't look at it from that standpoint, but a grade 1 lock, if it's certified by ANSI BHMA as grade 1, it's grade 1 hardware and meets that destructive entry test. So spool pins, mushroom pins are the top pins in the lock. If you don't know how a mechanical pen tumbler lock works, Practical Lock Picking is an excellent book that explains it in great detail. But they have serrations cut into the pin, or they're shaped basically like a spool, like wide at the top, wide at the bottom, and narrow in the middle. And they make it much more difficult. We'll say they make it more difficult, all other things being equal, to pick a lock open. And almost any locksmith is going to be able to put those in your lock at request. Although it's probably not a very common request, so you may run into the odd locksmith that just doesn't have any security pins.
Yeah, and I guess it's not something that most people even know about what they are, so they don't know to even ask for them.
Right.
And you're starting to get into a pretty, somebody's got to really be a pretty accomplished lockpick. So.
Yeah, and honestly, I would probably feel fairly comfortable with that. A grade 1, let's say Schlage deadbolt correctly installed with 6 pins with a couple of security pins in there. I'd probably feel pretty good about that, because picking locks in a vise when they're on your heated or air-conditioned office with plenty of light and all that is one thing. Doing it on someone's doorstep at 2 a.m. when it's cold out or hot out or raining out and you have no light is a completely different matter. So not that it can't be done, it absolutely can. Realistically, though, is it that big a threat? Probably not.
Yeah.
So I'd probably feel pretty good with that setup.
Well, definitely. So where do we go from here? Do we get into padlocks?
We can. Pretty much like anything else, you kind of get what you pay for. I'll cover padlocks fairly quickly. Don't buy anything with the word master on it.
Yeah.
I'm not denigrating any specific brand. I've just found coincidentally that padlocks that have that word embossed on them are typically fairly easy to defeat. I'll say this. If I were teaching a lock defeat class, there is probably a padlock I could find with the word master on it that would demonstrate almost every technique I wanted to show and demonstrate it fairly well. And I could be able to put that lock in the students' hands and they would be able to get repeatable success.
As a funny story to add to what you were saying, when I was really practicing lockpicking a lot, I could get into a lock with the word master on it faster with my lockpicks than I could with the key. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, you kind of get what you pay for. So I have fairly firm opinions about this. There are, and I have a blog post that's coming out in a couple of days. It'll be well out by the time this podcast posts about my personal recommendation. So the American Lock Company is actually owned by the Master Lock Company, but the quality of components they put in those two lines is vastly different. Mm-hmm. So first of all, if you buy an American padlock, it's going to be an all steel bodied padlock. It's not laminated. It's a solid piece of steel. The shackles are hardened. American is famous for this. Every single pin in that lock will be a security pin. To include the bottom pins, we'll have serrations cut on those. The top pins will all be spool pins or serrated pins. And the other, one huge thing you should look at when you buy a padlock is how the shackle is retained in the body of the padlock when it's locked. So frequently, you have a little spring-loaded plunger that, by force of that spring, embeds itself in a triangular-shaped cutout on the shackle. When you stick your key in the lock, turn it, it retracts that spring-loaded plunger out of that cutout on the shackle. Shackle's able to pop up, and your lock's open. You push the shackle back down, that spring forces it back in there, and your lock's closed again. That's not a very good way to do business. When you think about locks, if you can defeat the spring, you can defeat the lock, typically speaking. So anything that's spring-loaded, just like I was talking about, the knob sets, I typically don't want to rely on too heavily as a real security measure. So what you should look for instead is a padlock whose shackle is held in place by ball bearings. So the cutouts on the shackle will be semicircular in shape. And when you close that shackle, there's a big brass billet in the middle of the padlock. You turn the key to lock it, and that thing forces a ball bearing into that cutout on the shackle that can't move. It's trapped in place by that big rotating piece of brass in the middle of the padlock. There's nothing in the world that you can force down into the shackle well around that shackle to force that ball bearing back without you actually turn that piece of brass in the center of the padlock and allow that ball bearing to retract. And typically the pins and the keyway, the cylinder itself, is what protects that from happening. It's a bit of a conceptual leap if you can't actually see it. I have a couple kind of detailed photos of that on that blog post.
And we'll link to that in the show notes today.
But yeah, absolutely look for a padlock with balls, not springs. If you can defeat the spring, you can defeat the lock. So on the smart padlocks, there is one that I will kind of tentatively recommend. It's the Noke. I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure how it's pronounced. Noke or Noke, Noke. I have no financial interest in the sale of these locks, but it's a Bluetooth padlock that you can unlock with your smartphone. I have seen this lock beaten up. I've seen it. Basically, it took an 18-pound grinder to cut the shackle on this lock, and that's how it was finally defeated.
Oh, wow.
Which would pretty much defeat just about anything. At this point in time, those locks are made out of very, very robust materials, and someone really thought that one through fairly well.
Yeah, and it looks like, I'm looking at it now, it looks like they also make one in the same shape as the old Kryptonite bike locks that quickly disappeared from the market when someone proved they could open it with a ball stem of a ballpoint pen. Yeah, that's neat. And I was actually going to ask you about that because I do have one fence that the yard guy has to go in and out of. And of course, he always shows up like right when I'm in the meeting and it's like, oh, crap. So that's neat to know that there is actually one of these smart locks or smart padlocks out there that's worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that one's pretty legit. You can put in a little tap code, like basically choose your own little Morse code, and you depress the shackle, long press or short press in a predefined sequence that you set. You can unlock it that way with the number of presses on the shackle. And once you enter the right sequence, it'll unlock. Or you can unlock it from the app, or you can set up two-factor authentication. So you actually have to do the shackle sequence first and then go onto your smartphone and unlock that.
Oh, wow.
So I think it's a fairly well thought through design.
That's really neat. And I guess this is, and for people that are thinking maybe they don't need a very good lock for things, if you have a storage unit, those are always ripe for thieves to break into, and a favorite of thieves.
Yes, the American padlocks, you can pick up the 5200 series, which is your average mid-size padlock. It'll lock your Pelican gun cases. It's your most common form factor sized padlock. I think you can pick those up for about $12-15 on Amazon. They're not crazy expensive, but that is the lowest level of security I would go with for a padlock. There are just too many ways into padlocks that have spring shackle retainers. You can wrap those things. You can stick shims in there and push that spring shackle retainer back. Man, there's just so many ways into those things. And anything that's worth putting a padlock on is worth putting one on that can't be defeated by that lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you can still pick those American padlocks. People do it every day. But again, picking a lock that's on a hasp at chest height on a door is a different story than picking it on your couch while you're watching TV. But I definitely want to take those really easy, low-hanging fruit techniques out of the equation. Ball bearings and a decent cylinder that just anyone can't rake open.
So where do we go after padlocks and deadbolts and things like this? Like, what are the things do we need to consider from a physical security standpoint around our house?
So yeah, probably a lot of people have gun safes. One thing I want to point out on this is a lot of people buy safes with fire protection in mind. So the safe will protect your guns at 1400 degrees for 30 minutes. There's typically a heat level and a period of time that it protects for. And that's what a lot of people look for when they shop for gun safes. And that does not translate necessarily over into burglary protection. So the real world ratings for safes are residential security container, which if you open up the door of your safe and look around the inside rim of that door, there's probably a plate just tack welded on there that will give you the rating of that safe. Residential security container. The other ones you might see are TL15, TL30. That stands for tool resistant for 15 minutes, 30 minutes respectively. in the hands of an expert safecracker. And a TL-15 safe is a substantial upgrade over a residential security container. TRTL, now we're getting into stuff that probably no one except the very wealthy can afford, but tool and torch resistant. And then TXTL is tool, torch, and explosive resistant. Probably no one in the world is going to be affording those. But one thing about the TXTL safes is sometimes you will see the X6 designation placed at the end of that. And what that means is that all 6 sides of that safe meet the same security standard. Typically, all these ratings and security standards only apply to the door of the safe. And you should definitely be aware of that. The sides are typically much milder material. They typically don't have hard plate inside the left, right, top, bottom, and back of the safe. So if you can place those safe in an area where the sides and the top are kind of inaccessible for tool work, you can make your safe a much more resilient container by doing that. The other thing that people frequently overlook is you need to bolt this thing down. So for a lot of these ratings, especially when we get into TRTL, TXTL, when we get into those ratings, the ratings actually specify the safe has to weigh, I believe it's at least 1,000 pounds and or be bolted down. So if it doesn't weigh 1,000 pounds, it has to be bolted down. If it weighs over that, probably nobody's carrying that thing off. But a 300-pound safe with 100 pounds of stuff in it, you get 2 big guys, they can probably manhandle that thing in a pickup, and then they just take the Sawzall to it, work on it all weekend. In any event, it doesn't matter if they get into it or not. You're safe, and all the stuff in it is gone. Mm-hmm. That hurts you either way. So things to look for if you're buying a safe, and again, keeping in mind that this only applies to the door, is look for the hard plate that is inside the door. So this typically protects the bolt works, what's called the bolt works, which are that series of bolts that extend out from the door into the body of the safe when you lock it. So hard plate basically prevents drilling through the front. So you can't like tap out little pins that disengage the bolt works, or you can't. Drilling is a big defeat for safes, or so you can't drill into the lock of the safe itself. Now, safe locks for any kind of reputable safe manufacturer all kind of have the same footprint, which means they have the same shape and size, so they're more or less interchangeable. And that even goes for the super high electronic things like the Kaba X09 that the government uses, which you can buy. They're about $1,000. Unless your safe meets a really high standard, I probably wouldn't recommend it. But if I can drill through to that lock, I can drill key components out of that lock and open the door, cause the door to be unlocked. So maybe I just drill the bolts out, stick something through there and push the lock body, and it just falls down into the door. Now I can retract the bolt, whatever. So you want the more hard plate you have between the face of that door and the lock, the better off you are. You also kind of want to look at the construction of that. That hard plate should have either bits of carbide or ball bearings, typically packed in oil, that sort of thing. Those are to break drill bits, make it hard to drill through.
I know this is random. What rating is it when you start getting into things like where there's the plates of glass inside it, that if you drill and break the glass, it locks the safe down?
So those are called relockers, and those aren't actually all that uncommon, even on the like residential gun safe market. So the glass relockers, man, if you move a lot, I would always open the safe door before you move. So there are strands of wire connected to the sheet of glass that has strategically pre-drilled holes to, so the spindle for the dial and things like that can go through. But if I drill in and I break that sheet of glass, these relockers are activated. They're very strongly spring-loaded. And the problem with those is you actually have to destructively enter that safe. It's not connected to the bolt works. There's no way to retract those from the outside of the door without putting holes in the door. So very, very good measure of protection. And drilling safes is not rocket science. You don't have to have the crew from the Italian Job coming into your house to do this. A fair number of people know how to drill safes. If you're on vacation for 2 weeks and they find a really nice safe in your house, that's not outside the realm of possibility. If you're investing in a safe, you probably have something to put in it. So yeah, relockers are not a bad idea and they come in various form factors. They're not always glass, but if you do have glass relockers, you should definitely be open that door before you move. So if those things are fired, the locksmith or the safe guy can just take the plate off the back of the door and reset those relockers rather than having to do it from the outside. And then maybe the other thing on that would be the locks themselves. They're basically broken down into group 3, group 2, group 1, group 1R. Most safes are going to come with a group 3 lock, which now we get into safe manipulation. You can learn it on the internet. You buy a cutaway Sergeant Greenleaf lock on eBay. You watch some YouTube videos, like all that stuff you see in movies where they're, have a stethoscope on the door. Not 100% accurately portrayed, but also not total BS either. Manipulating safe locks is a little bit of an art form, but it's not a high art. A lot of people can do it. And believe me, if an idiot like me can learn to do it, anyone can. So group 3 provides, again, that's kind of your grade 3 deadbolt, not super high secure. Group 2 is going to be better. And then group 1 is generally what's considered your manipulation proof locks, although they can be manipulated, but now we're talking about expert safe people. And then group 1R, probably no one has a need for residential. The R stands for radiological attack, which means X-raying the safe, finding those gates, and manipulating it through X-ray, which is probably not realistic for any of us.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm not going to invest in a group 1R lock.
Yeah.
But those are really quick things you can look for if you're on the safe market. Look, go for the thickest hard plate you can afford, 1/4 inch. Go for, a group 2 or a group 1 lock over that standard group 3 that comes on it. And remember, this only applies to the door. And look for the rating of the safe too. TL15, if you can get it, I'm telling you, that will go way beyond 15 minutes with all but the most expert destructive safe people.
So to back up for a minute and go into fire ratings, I've heard it put that more often than not, your safe is going to protect your valuables from fire than an actual burglar. So I guess 1, do you agree with that? And 2, when you're looking at fire ratings, what do you look for as just a personal minimum standard of fire safety?
I think you're probably absolutely correct on that. For me, because of my security hangups, that's probably secondary to security for me, even though not super high risk. So I don't really have a good recommendation to give you, with the exception that some manufacturers do make safes with both security and fire ratings. AMSEC, I think that stands for American Security. If you look for AMSEC safes, they have a line of safes that are both TL15 and meets. These fire standards are a little bit arbitrary. To my knowledge, there isn't a unified governing body that says this is a ABC level fire protection. They're all kind of this temperature for this amount of time.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
That's my understanding. I may be wrong on that. Again, the fire protection is a little bit my weak point in this area.
I gotcha. Okay. So I guess to wrap up, what are some other things that people need to do? I mean, obviously there's situational awareness. We can touch on that for a second. But I guess even beyond that, what are some of the other things people should be doing and considering when it comes to their personal physical security?
Yeah, man, that's a question.
Yeah.
Close your blinds. Don't leave your blinds wide open when you go on vacation with your MacBook and your 1911 and your gold bullion sitting right inside of the window there.
Yeah, man, I leave my gold bullion laying everywhere. I'm bad about that personally.
Yeah, I've got this trunk full of gold Cougarons that I leave in the hotel room when housekeeping comes in.
Yeah.
I would say that just generally take the Glock Perfection stickers off the back of your car. Every time I see a guy with a Smith & Wesson sticker, a Bushmaster sticker, and a Glock sticker, I'm like, man, if I need a gun, that's who I'm following home.
Yeah, you know what I do with those? I stick those on my gun safe.
Yeah, I stick them on my Pelican case that is obviously a rifle case.
Yeah,
I don't need to, Glock is not paying me money to advertise for them. I'm a strictly revolver guy anyway, but they're not paying me money to advertise for them. I'm not going to put that sticker on my car. So everybody that passes me on the highway knows that I have maybe guns in my car when I park that car, or probably almost certainly guns in my house. I don't need to put that fact out there for people. And on that too, the stick figure family, and I've seen some really bad examples.
Yeah.
I have an example I use in my classes. It's got the whole family, mom, dad, 3 kids, 2 dogs, a cat, and a hamster. It says the Smith crew, we'll say. And underneath each person, it's got their first name. That is just terrible, terrible from an operational security standpoint. Man, there's so many ways that someone with malicious intent could use that. Roll up at your kid's school and be like, hey, I'm here to pick up Ashley Smith. Yeah, her dad, Mike, told me to come over here. I mean, oh yeah, and they have a dog named Ranger, and just terrible. So many ways that could be used maliciously against you. That's a big one. Lock your car doors. There's a website called activeresponsetraining.net. It's written by an Ohio law enforcement officer, and he does some good analysis of all the vehicle break-ins they have in his jurisdiction, and some astounding percentage are when vehicles are not locked. Some astronomical percentage, somewhere like 80%, are either the vehicle's not locked or it's locked, but there are valuables in plain sight. He said it's incredibly rare that a car is locked and it looks like nothing is in there, or nothing of any value anyway, and it gets broken into. Usually people can't really steal car radios like you could back in the day, because the electronics in cars have gotten better. People aren't buying aftermarket radios like they used to. So if you're not presenting a really interesting target, you're probably going to be okay. And watch where you park, that sort of thing. Man, this is such a broad and varied topic. I feel like I should probably stop talking and let you wrap this up, but I could go on and on.
Yeah, no, it is so easy to run into so many different things because there is so much out there. But I think you've done such a great job on touching on the big ones today, especially when it comes to locks, and even the hot tip on an E padlock that is actually good. And if anybody comes out with a home smart deadbolt lock that's worth a flip, please let me know about it, because I'm dying to replace mine with one of those.
Oh, definitely will. Yeah. So the deadbolt that I use and recommend, I'll just throw it out there, is the Abloy ProTech 2 for single cylinder. It's going to run you $150. There's only one online source that I know of. I have no financial interest in their sales at all, but it's called securitysnobs.com. Great customer service, and they sell some amazing product lines on the physical security side, to include padlocks in that line as well. One other thing, fly with guns. Everywhere I fly, I use a Pelican case, like a hard-sided big Pelican case, as my checked luggage. I always travel with a firearm, even if I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to carry it, because it lets me use a lock, an actual lock on that case that no one else has the key to per the federal law. I'm forbidden by law from using a TSA lock on that case. Just a pro tip there.
You know, that is such a great tip. And I think one of the other things is for people who, for whatever reason, can't carry firearm, or if they're going to an area where they can't have a firearm like that, you have to, of course, check the local laws of where you're coming from and going to actually do this. But you can do the same thing with a starter pistol. Or technically, you're supposed to do the same thing with a starter pistol. Even though it's not a firearm, you're still supposed to lock it up the same way, which I always thought was interesting.
Or a flare gun.
Or a flare gun, yeah. Yeah, flare gun, that might be just fun to travel with, I think.
And I would say never do that if you're flying into New York City. Because when you go to fly out, there's a good chance you're going to run into, or if you're caught with that, anywhere during your stay, you're probably going to have some. Your trip is probably going to go much differently than you intended it to.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Well, awesome. Well, Justin, how can people get in touch with you? I know you've got a blog and all kinds of wonderful stuff. Where do they go to keep up with all things you?
Okay, so my Twitter handle is @secguide, SEC guide. My blog is, the URL is prepperopsec.com. Also, I'll just throw in a quick plug for my most recent book, The Complete Privacy and Security Desk Reference, Volume 1. Mike and I, my co-author, are working on Volume 2, which deals specifically with physical security. And if it's anything like the first one, which is about 500 pages, This next one will probably be a fairly significant tome. It should be out sometime next year, about this time next year we're shooting for.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us real quick. So what is it? Somebody goes out and they get that book. They hear you. It's like, this sounds like a really cool guy. I'm going to pick up his book. What are they going to get out of that book?
CP&S Volume 1 Digital covers computer security, mobile device security, online account security, basically soup to nuts. From a very principle-driven standpoint, we try to cover Mac, Windows and Linux, iPhone and Android. And then on the privacy side, it's taking things like mentions of yourself. Well, first of all, doing a self-background check and finding what information is out there about you on the internet, scrubbing your social media profiles for any potentially compromising information, all those people search sites that have records of your home address, phone number, family members, that sort of thing, that anyone can find just on Google, getting rid of those. And we get into a lot of other more tinfoil hat topics like making fake records like that appear in that system by kind of manipulating the system a little bit. And all the way through buying a house completely invisibly with no ties to it whatsoever, and basically living that lifestyle. It's broken down into 4 parts, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert. So you don't have to do all of that. There's something in there for everybody, but basically the option is there to take it as far as you would like to take it.
Awesome. Tell us the name of that book one more time.
It is The Complete Privacy and Security Desk Reference by Justin Carroll and Michael Basil. And it's available on Amazon.com. You can find a description on my website.
And tell us your website address one more time.
PrepperOpsec.com. We'll get you there from here. The full address is yourultimatesecurity.guide.
Awesome. Justin, thank you so much for coming on again. I look forward to having you on again in the future.
Yeah, thank you again, Aaron.
As always, show notes, links, and resources from this episode can be found at intherabbithole.com/E179. And don't forget, visit ITRH.net to become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. Again, that's ITRH.net. Do it today because the show is supported by members just like you. With that, we wrap up episode number 179 from the Lone Star State. Until next time, stay safe and sound.